You think cowboys walked into saloons looking for a wild night of romance and gunslinging, but they were actually walking into a sophisticated financial meat grinder operated by the smartest entrepreneurs on the frontier. Here is the thing about saloon romance that sounds completely backwards. The women cowboys loved weren't there to break their hearts. They were there to systematically empty their pockets before they could even finish a second glass of rot-gut whiskey. Yeah, you heard that right. The Hollywood myth of the soiled dove with a heart of gold is mostly a fairy tale. The reality was a brutal, high-stakes business environment where women managed a complex economy of loneliness. Taking even a few steps onto that sawdust floor meant a cowboy was entering a world where his emotions were a commodity to be traded, taxed, and liquidated by experts who knew exactly how to play the game of the Old West. The gender ratio in frontier towns was about 10-1, creating a psychological pressure cooker that few modern men could handle. When a lonely miner or cowboy hit town with a bag of gold dust, his brain was basically a pile of dry tinder waiting for a spark. Saloon women figured this out the hard way during those brutal years of the gold rush. Mining camps were basically open-air prisons of testosterone with zero social outlets for stressed-out workers. Most cowboys chose the saloon not for the sex, but for the illusion of civilization. They would watch their hard-earned dust vanish in hours, paying for a dance that lasted 3 minutes. Desperate men would wait in line for a chance to just hold a woman's hand or hear a voice that didn't sound like a gravel pit. It was like trying to satisfy a starving man with pictures of a feast, and the women running the show were the master chefs of this grand illusion. Saloon owners realized early on that love could destroy a budget faster than any gambling habit. Stories spread through every territory about men who spent a year's wages in a single weekend. Professional hostesses, known as hurdy-gurdy girl, were basically human tax collectors with violins. They would charge $1 for a dance, keep half for the house, and then trick the man into buying a round of overpriced drinks at the bar immediately afterward. Smart madams quickly learned that companionship could drain a wallet faster than any outlaw's six-shooter. Saloon culture became a sophisticated trap designed to keep the money flowing from the mines back into the town's economy. Clean conversation became more valuable than physical intimacy because you could charge for it by the hour. Seriously, these women would guard their time like a bank vault, because that is exactly what it was to them and their bosses. But here is where the saloon girls got creative. They developed tricks that would make modern marketing executives look like rank amateurs. After learning that a cowboy's loneliness was basically a gold mine, they had to get efficient fast. Their first instinct? Use the music. The rhythm of the dance was carefully timed to maximize turnover. They couldn't just let a man talk forever. They needed him moving, drinking, and paying for another ticket. Smart crews rigged up elaborate signaling systems using whatever they had at hand. Fans, handkerchiefs, and even the way a skirt was held became a secret language for the staff. A specific flick of a fan meant, "This guy is a big spender," while a folded handkerchief meant, "Call the bouncer." The trick was positioning everyone just right so the cowboy felt like the center of the universe, while being moved through the system like a piece of livestock. Makes sense, right? But here is where it gets interesting. These women quickly discovered that playing the role of a lady was like selling a mirage to a man who had been wandering in the desert for months. Gross, but lucrative. They developed a routine of emotional cleaning, scrubbing the rough edges off a man's day before he even realized he was being played. This meant precious energy spent on acting, but it was worth it to avoid the violent outbursts of a bored drunk. Then there were the shingle shifters. Saloon women became surprisingly good at improvised accounting, creating ways to inflate a bar tab from memory. These makeshift systems could funnel every precious ounce of gold from a miner's pouch straight into the hidden safes behind the bar. Some girls got so good at this that they could calculate the value of gold dust by the weight in their hand during a single waltz. Talk about high-speed data processing. But wait, it gets even weirder. When the gold wasn't flowing, desperate saloon women turned to shaving the dust. They would grow their fingernails long and coat them in a sticky wax or grease. As they pinched gold dust out of a miner's pouch to pay for a drink, a tiny amount would stick under their nails. Over a long night of service, they could walk away with a small fortune in stolen particles. Every grain counted when you were living on the edge of the world. The real problem with all these methods was that the frontier didn't follow a business schedule. A saloon could go weeks without a big strike coming into town, especially in the remote parts of the territories. The nail-shaving trick worked better in some regions than others, depending on the purity of the local gold and the sobriety of the miners. Well, clever madams started combining techniques to ensure a steady stream of revenue, regardless of the weather or the economy. They would set up permanent gambling tables while also rotating dance duties among the staff. The most successful saloon owners treated their business like a military operation. Everyone had specific jobs, and slacking off could mean bankruptcy for the entire house. And the weird part is, these early methods worked pretty well when conditions were right. A good saloon could collect enough capital during a rush to last through several lean winters. Unfortunately, the law of the West wasn't always cooperative, which forced these women to look for more reliable solutions. They needed something that didn't depend on the luck of the miners or the mood of the cowboys. Something they could control themselves, even when the local sheriff was looking for a bribe. Madams might have thought they solved their financial problems once they built their halls, but managing the assets was a nightmare wrapped in silk and sealed with lead. Every major saloon carried a hidden arsenal of small-caliber pistols called derringers. And yes, they were usually tucked into garters or hidden in the folds of a dress. These weren't your standard-issue cavalry revolvers. We are talking about tiny, two-shot beasts that could stop a man at close range. But here is where things got dangerous fast. Violence in a wooden building didn't just stay in one room. The thin walls meant a stray bullet could turn your investment into a funeral pyre. Saloon life wasn't just a party. It was a constant struggle to stay relevant in a world that wanted to discard you. The women themselves would start aging out of the dance role from the stress alone, turning their precious career into a race against time. Bacteria and disease loved these crowded, unventilated wooden rooms and threw parties that would make your stomach turn inside out. Then there was the flavor problem nobody talks about in the history books. These saloons weren't brand new. They were often recycled buildings that had stored everything from livestock to explosives. Your high-end parlor would pick up hints of whatever lived in that wood before. One day you are selling the illusion of a luxury ballroom. The next, it has notes of rancid mule. Makes sense, right? Wood absorbs everything like a thirsty sponge, and the smell of 100 unwashed men isn't something you can just fan away. Women discovered the hard way that their carefully crafted reputation could turn into toxic gossip within days. The irony was brutal. You could be the queen of the town while surrounded by people who would turn on you the moment your bank account ran dry. Well, desperate times called for desperate measures. Saloon women weren't exactly known for giving up easily, especially when their lives and their freedom depended on their ability to outsmart the men around them. They started experimenting, trying anything that might keep their business from turning into a failure. Some madams tried adding refined arts like piano playing or theater to their halls, hoping it would filter out the nastier elements of the crowd. Others rotated their staff between different towns, constantly moving their product to prevent any one container from getting too stale. But these were just temporary fixes for a problem that demanded real structural solutions. And the weird part is, the answer was literally staring them in the face every time they looked at their ledger. The solution involved real estate, legal loopholes, and a technique that would accidentally revolutionize how women owned property in America. Madams were about to become accidental civil rights pioneers, and their next discovery would change the landscape of the West forever. Saloon women were about to prove that a corset was just armor for a CEO. When your town is dying of boredom and your whiskey tastes like rotting swamp water, you get creative fast. Here is where things get interesting. Some clever madam figured out that land could actually save her career. They started deliberately buying the land under the saloons before even building the structures. Sounds crazy? Well, this property trick was pure genius disguised as a simple real estate deal. The process was simple, but brilliant. Madams would use front men or legal loopholes to acquire title to the most valuable corners in town, letting the dirt blacken their hands while they secured their futures. They would stop before the town even incorporated, leaving behind a layer of ownership that coated the entire main street. Then they would fill these lots with their businesses and wait for the taxman to realize he had no power. And the weird part is, it actually worked. That layer of land ownership wasn't just decoration. It acted like nature's own legal filter. The deeded surface grabbed onto the town's wealth and kept it from being seized by the proper authorities who arrived later. Think of it as the world's first female-led real estate investment trust, invented by women who weren't even allowed to vote. Madams noticed their deeded land stayed profitable longer than their physical beauty or their youth. Instead of turning into a social pariah after a few years, a woman with a deed could last decades without becoming completely irrelevant. This land-based wealth didn't just trap money, it actually slowed down the social decay that destroyed women in the respectable world. What makes this even more amazing is that saloon women accidentally stumbled onto something we still use today, the power of the landlord. Modern property moguls and business magnates use the same principles of strategic acquisition. That deeded land changes the power dynamic of the city, filtering out the losers and adding value to the owners. Saloon women weren't trying to make fancy social statements. They just wanted a retirement plan that wouldn't kill them. The land-owning method spread quickly among the madams because it actually saved lives and created dynasties. Word travels fast when you find something that keeps your bank account from dying of neglect. Madams started ordering their staff to save every penny for property before they even bought their first silk dress. But even this clever trick had limitations. Deeded land still couldn't perform miracles during a total town collapse, and the process used up precious political capital and legal fees. Saloon women needed backup plans when land wasn't enough. Then there is something even more surprising that they discovered about keeping their status fresh. They found that adding certain valuable metals to their wardrobe created almost magical results that seemed impossible to believe. While madams were busy buying land and cursing the local sheriff, some clever entrepreneurs discovered something fascinating. Wearing massive amounts of gold jewelry wasn't just vanity. It was accidental genius. Those shiny nuggets and heavy chains weren't there for luck. They were there for survival. Here is what happened. Saloon women noticed that having their wealth visible and portable kept them safer. The gold didn't lose its value when a bank failed or a town burned down. It didn't smell like a swamp after 2 weeks in a travel trunk. Makes sense, right? Well, they didn't know they were dealing with the frontier's most powerful insurance policy. Gold doesn't rot. Not some of it. None of it. Modern economics proves this works because gold is the ultimate hedge against a chaotic environment, basically destroying the risk of a total loss before it can multiply. Saloon women stumbled onto this centuries before anyone understood global market volatility. They just knew their status lasted longer when precious metal sat around their necks or hung from their ears. But here is the weird part. Some madams swore their gold-wearing staff performed better too. More confident, more professional, less like they were selling their souls and more like they were running a gold exchange. Madams would argue over which type of jewelry worked best. Comstock silver seemed popular, though nobody could explain why. Maybe it was purer. Maybe it was just frontier psychology at work. The really smart madams hoarded gold specifically for crisis management. When the town went bust, they would keep their gold jewelry while everyone else lost their houses. Food could run out, whiskey could disappear, but gold, that was life or death. Real treasure meant staying wealthy long enough to move to San Francisco and become a respectable widow. Then there is the practical side. Jewelry was easy to retrieve when escaping a fire or a raid. Unlike other assets that burned or were stolen, gold stayed gold. Women could fish out their necklaces, rinse off the soot, and toss them into a new safe in a new town. Recycling wealth at its finest. Modern investors still use gold for the same protective properties. Portfolio diversification systems sometimes include physical gold components. Those desperate saloon women accidentally discovered something that high-tech finance uses today. Not bad for women who thought a corset was a required business uniform. Of course, gold wasn't perfect. It couldn't fix a reputation that was already completely rotten. It worked best as prevention, not a cure for a social scandal. Smart madams learned to buy their gold immediately, not wait until the problem started brewing. The jewelry trick spread through the frontier faster than gossip about a new silver strike. Madams who ignored this method often found themselves dealing with poverty and a bitter end. But even gold had its limits when the law reached the frontier and the wild days were numbered. That's when saloon women needed something more dramatic than jewelry and land. While gold and deeds helped keep their businesses afloat, they still faced their biggest nightmare, being surrounded by an endless ocean of respectability they couldn't enter. That's when the craftiest madams turned to what sounds like pure magic, turning a scandalous past into a life-saving, respectable future. The process called social distillation wasn't new, but saloon women had to get creative with frontier materials. Boil away the past, catch the reputation, let it cool back into a new identity, and boom, the scandal stays behind. Simple in theory, absolutely brutal in practice when you are fighting social norms with limited options. One of the most successful madams ever actually ordered a special social rig built right into her life. Her community thought she was crazy until they realized this contraption could save her life during those endless years of aging. The setup used charity donations, heated over carefully controlled social events, with church pews positioned to catch every precious drop of public approval. But here is where it gets interesting and dangerous. These social rigs needed constant attention because one wrong move could start a public outrage. Madams had to balance keeping the past hot enough to generate money while not burning down their only escape route into high society. Talk about high-stakes social climbing. The fuel problem was massive too. Every ounce of effort spent on respectability was effort that couldn't be used for running the business or managing the staff. Some madams got so desperate they started burning their furniture, their old friends, even their own names, anything that would generate the heat of a new identity. The smell must have been absolutely terrible. Then there is the speed issue nobody talks about. These homemade social transformations produced results incredibly slowly. We are talking maybe a few friends per year if you were lucky. A lonely madam needed a huge social network just to survive, let alone stay healthy enough to retire or live effectively. Smart saloon women learned to time their social runs perfectly. They would fire up the respectability during calm economic times when the town wasn't focused on vice, making it easier to manage the delicate setup. Some even took turns staying respectable all night to keep the process running continuously. The copper-bottomed reputation they used often came from melted-down pasts, old connections, or even stolen church items. Ironic that their plundered wealth literally became their lifeline into the very society they were supposed to be destroying. Saloon women discovered that a new name worked better than other methods because it conducted social status efficiently and didn't rust in the salty air of town gossip. Of course, social distillation wasn't their only trick. When the fuel ran low or the law made the past too risky, they had to get even more creative with their survival methods. While land and gold were clever solutions, they didn't stop there. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and some madams got downright creative with their legacy-saving tricks. The most popular backup plan? Investing in the education of their children. Now, this wasn't about being a good mother, though that was probably a nice side effect. Madams discovered that sending their kids to elite boarding schools back east actually slowed down the nasty social bacteria that made their family name taste like swamp juice. The Eastern education acted like a preservative, keeping their family's status drinkable for longer stretches of history. Smart, right? But education wasn't the only weapon in their arsenal. Some madams swore by adding political influence to their storage of power. A politician's protection didn't just mask the horrible taste of a vice-filled business, it actually fought off harmful legal microbes too. Saloon women would also toss in charitable foundations when they could get them, or whatever respectable hobbies they had lying around. Anything to cover up the funky social flavors brewing in those wooden halls. Then there were the really desperate identity-filtering attempts. Picture saloon women trying to strain a murky past through layers of fancy French accents stuffed into old silk bags. Some madams used fake ancestry as makeshift filters, believing that a royal lineage would catch impurities. Did it work? Sometimes. Was it pretty gross? Absolutely. The weirdest concoction had to be what some called Madam's Coffee. This bizarre social drink mixed a weak past, questionable money, and whatever random civilized habits they could scrounge up from European books. Etiquette lessons, strange tea ceremonies, even ground-up Latin phrases. Anything to make their social situation more bearable. It probably tasted awful, but it was better than dying of social isolation. Of course, not every experiment ended well. Some madams tried using legal intimidation or blackmail-lined pots for their power systems, thinking the fear would keep things fresh. What they didn't know was that blackmail slowly poisoned anyone who used it. Madams would get isolated weak and paranoid without understanding why their improved power setup was actually killing them. The trial and error approach cost lives, but it also led to genuine discoveries. Saloon women were basically living social laboratories, testing wild theories about upward mobility while fighting for survival on the edge of the world. While these makeshift solutions kept many madams alive, the most innovative ones were already working on something far more ambitious. Some were experimenting with techniques that went way beyond simple filtering and flavoring, methods that could actually transform the vice itself into something virtuous through surprisingly advanced processes. When regular social climbing wasn't cutting it, saloon women got creative with institutional charity. These tough, stretchy social sacks made perfect watertight containers for public redemption. They would fill a charity bladder with saloon money, tie it shut, then hang it in the direct sunlight of public view. The heat of publicity would cause appreciation inside the bladder, and fresh droplets of respectability would collect on the inner walls. Madams could then carefully drain the condensed goodwill through a small hole in their public image. Gross? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Но зачем останавливаться на достигнутом, если можно уйти в подполье? Некоторые владелицы салунов обнаружили, что финансирование строительства церквей и больниц создавало естественные камеры испарения для их грехов. The town's steady growth and the porous nature of social institutions worked together like a slow-motion filter. The vice money would gradually seep through the institutional walls, leaving the sin crystals behind while cleaner social status collected in buried containers nearby. This method took patience, but it worked even when public opinion was scarce. Then there is the political kelp trick that sounds almost too weird to believe. Saloon women noticed that certain types of political alliances could actually help separate the scandal from the business naturally. When mixed with saloon operations and left to sit, these alliances would absorb the legal salt while releasing a cleaner operation. The process wasn't perfect, but it reduced the saltiness of their reputation enough to make their business drinkable in emergencies. Political machines basically became living filters. Let's not forget about those massive legal cannons sitting around doing nothing between elections. Experienced madams figured out they could use these human beasts as heat exchangers for faster social distillation. They would run their interests through the politician's office, then heat the system with campaign contributions. The vice flowing through the system would turn to civilized progress much quicker than traditional methods. The politician's ego held the heat longer too, making the whole process more efficient. Who knew weapons of corruption could save a woman's legacy through social purification? And the weird part is what happened when saloon women reached the colder northern territories of high society. They developed emergency status melting techniques that were surprisingly sophisticated. They would collect frozen assets, which naturally contain less stigma. Then they would melt them down in controlled batches of high-end real estate. Fresh snow, newly minted fortunes, was even better, almost pure status, just waiting to be melted. Some crews built special asset collection nets specifically for this purpose. These advanced methods separated the amateur madams from the true social survival experts. While landlubbers worried about treasure maps, seasoned saloon women were mastering the chemistry of power. They turned their establishments into floating social laboratories where every experiment could mean the difference between life and death. The most successful saloon women weren't just good at running a bar. They were brilliant at staying alive and wealthy through innovation, determination, and some seriously clever social wizardry. They didn't just survive the Wild West, they engineered a way to own it.